Mindfulness works best if we bring an attitude of kindness, acceptance, friendliness. We're paying attention, we're investigating, exploring, observing and receiving the present time experience with the intention of meeting all of the experience, no matter how many times the mind wanders, gets involved in the future and the past. Being kind, being accepting, friendly, patient. As you return to the breath, as you come back to the body sitting. Non-judgmental, present time, kind awareness. Continuing to try to ignore what your mind is up to, thinking about. Keep disengaging. Keep returning to the body. investigating the changing nature of sensation, impermanence, how the breath comes and goes. Each breath a different depth, length, texture. The beginning, middle, and end of each breath. If you're pretty new to this technique, this practice, let the breath be the anchor, home base. Keep coming back, keep settling your attention in this simple experience that's always happening, the body always breathing. It's a reliable refuge. The Buddha's instructions in this kind of meditation expand, become more inclusive, including the mind, the heart, the body, the emotions, and the thoughts. And bringing attention, investigation to what is perceived as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Since our topic is the relationship to the pleasant, you can contemplate and investigate your experience right now. Your relationship to, is there anything pleasant happening in your body, your heart, your mind. Even subtly pleasant. I don't know if it's true for you, but when I just bring my attention to how my hands are resting, the contact of the hands resting on the legs, the warmth of that contact has a subtle pleasure to it. Turning our awareness on what the mind is thinking about, investigating the content, the plans, the memories, the fantasies, the mind's tendency to worry or crave, resent. Almost all of the mind tendencies can be tracked back to seeking a pleasant outcome. We're afraid that we won't have a pleasant experience, or we'll lose something that we want to keep. We won't get something that we want. So we observe and investigate our relationship to pleasure. We likely see our tendency to cling, to grasp, to become attached and craving. Mindfulness reveals the impermanent nature of all things, including the pleasant mind states or emotions or sensations. So much of the practice becomes one of allowing impermanence, letting go of trying to keep. Trying to respond with a non-attached, non-clinging enjoyment, appreciation. The pleasant moments, the pleasant experiences. Non-attached appreciation. I often find it a little bit of a dilemma to be a householder Buddhist, a layperson, to be following these teachings of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, who was a renunciate, who was a celibate monk. And, this topic of pleasure and indulgence, I find it a little bit of a dilemma that, my teacher the founder of the tradition, and a lot of my teachers who are monks are choosing this path of celibacy, renunciation, simplicity. They're not indulging in the kind of sense pleasures that I choose to indulge in. And it can sometimes set up a little bit of a feeling like a second-class Buddhist. Like they're the real Buddhists, the kind of ones that are really giving up the worldly pleasures. And there's a lot of emphasis in the teachings of giving up worldly pleasures. And even one of the ways that the Buddha framed the path, he said it's this middle path, and it's between the two dead ends, the dead end of worldly pleasures and the dead end of extreme renunciation. And it's this balanced path of some pleasure, but not taking pleasure as the source of happiness, as a refuge. And I feel like that's the core, one of the core teachings, and one of the core things for us to look at and see if we believe and agree with and make sense to us. That there is no material or sensual source of happiness, of really reliable long-term well-being. That having been said, there's a place where the Buddha said there's 4 kinds of happiness that people experience. There is the temporary relative happiness of material things and the temporary relative happiness of sense pleasures. It's not that sense pleasures don't feel good and make us happy for a minute. We like them. Stuff, you like your stuff, but it doesn't really work as far as long-term, the whole Buddhist conversation, which is what really ends suffering in our lives, what really leads to a sense of a reliable refuge that is not temporary, not based on circumstances or the conditions. That's free from I'm only happy when I'm comfortable. I'm only happy when I'm having pleasure. I'm only happy when things are going my way. I'm getting the right kind of attention and not the wrong kind of attention, and I'm getting the right kind of environment and not the unpleasant. Right, and mostly whatever the right is, mostly when things are pleasant. Does it feel like that to you? I mean, it feels a little bit of a dilemma for me around choosing to meditate and practice the path, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, but not choosing to go as far as monasticism, not choosing celibacy, not choosing to avoid pleasure, but choosing. And I don't know, if you're brand new, this might not be even on your radar yet if you're new to Buddhism. But at some point when you're studying and practicing Buddhism, I think we have to say, okay, I am choosing to be a householder, a lay person. I'm choosing to be in the world. It's an option to go and be a nun. You can go and be a monk. You can go and be a nun. If you want, if you want to be a full-time professional Buddhist, it's an option. It can become your profession, not a teaching profession, but a practicing profession. It can become your calling. And I don't know how many of you have thought about ordaining, because I've been practicing since I was quite young, and I met monks early in my Buddhist practice. It was a real, especially in my 20s, it was a real consideration. Should I become a monk? Is that the best way to do this thing? And visited the monasteries and did the retreats and went on the pilgrimages. And at some point, I made the conscious decision to not take that path and to stay on this householder, lay person, indulging in pleasure on a level that the monastics don't. But wanting, and this is the topic, wanting to find a way, a relationship to pleasure and pain and stuff, material, that I don't suffer so much about, that I at least decrease the suffering around. And technically, from a Buddhist teaching, there are teachings of householders getting enlightened. Technically, it's possible within the world of indulgence and sense pleasures, as long as there's a level of renunciation and I mean, really, the Buddha said there's only 5 things that you really need to renounce. Short list. There's not a long list. We don't even have 7 deadly sins, just 5 precepts. If you want to get enlightened and you're going to care about your karma, your action. And so maybe it's interesting to think of the 5 precepts as renunciation of pleasure, so the first one is to not kill. Now, maybe for some, that's like, oh, fuck, I can't kill. No murdering, like that's a source. I don't know if anybody in their top 3 was like, I really like to kill. That's one of my sources of pleasure is murder. And, you know, sort of funny, like, because like, hopefully that's, you know, no sociopaths here that are killing people. But, you know, part of that renunciation, that first precept is also around killing any living being, around indulging in killing insects or animals or hunting or fishing or, you know, I don't know, we're in Los Angeles, probably not a lot of hunters here, but maybe some fishing, you know, people who are like, I love fishing, love to torture fish. Brings me great joy. I hook them, I kill them, I squish them, I gut them, whatever you do to fish. It's just so fun to murder fish. And there, you know, there's a level of renunciation of saying, like, even though I do, you know, I grew up fishing and I enjoy doing that, I'm going to choose not to. For some people, that is a renunciation. Lying and stealing. You know, these are like basic ethical, moral encouragements, but, you know, it's really fucking fun to steal. When was the last time you did a little shoplifting? It's a thrill. It's been a long time for me, but it's just, what an adrenaline rush to steal, you know, and it's a source of like the fear, the excitement, of saying like, okay, I'm not going to indulge in that kind of thrill. I'm not going to steal because of the karma of that dishonesty. I'm not going to lie. Also, lying, telling a really, you know, really, can be really fun. I mean, do you lie for fun? You don't have to admit it, but, you know, reflecting on, it's really like just, even just sort of bullshitting somebody, telling, you know, kind of can be fun. So some of that sources of pleasure, killing, lying, stealing, part of the, you know, the Buddha saying, hey, you know, you might enjoy those, but they're creating negative karma for you. It's not worth it. If you want a reliable refuge, if you want to get free from suffering, you're going to have to let go of the lying and killing and stealing. And then the other 2, which to let go of, you know, I think sex is probably, I don't know, what do you know, I mean, do you think, is sex the most pleasant human experience? Besides heroin. If you haven't done heroin, I don't know, maybe people like ecstasy or, you know, drugs. So, you know, the 4th and 5th, you know, or 3rd and 5th are about avoiding sexual misconduct and not using intoxicants, right? And so this is where there's some real renunciation and some now sexual misconduct. Buddhism is so liberal around sexuality. It's not homophobic. It's not even it's not even about marriage or commitment or pretty open. The Buddhist teachings around sexuality are like consenting adults who are single. No cheating, no lying, no, you know, and that's about it. He's saying, like, as long as you're being honest in your relationships and you're not cheating on somebody, or you're not engaging with somebody who's cheating on somebody, you're not engaging in dishonesty, and it's sort of consenting adult, relationship, but avoid misconduct. And I don't know what the statistic is around cheating, but I think it's pretty high. People cheat on each other. And maybe it's mostly, if we have the statistics, mostly it's males who cheat more than females, but female cheating, I think, is on the rise from what I understand. It's more and more common. And there's something that must be really exciting about it. It's a little bit like it's lying. It's that pleasure of lying and stealing, and there's something about it that people really love to do, to get away with something, to have the security of their relationship while also stepping out into other relationships. And but the karma of that dishonesty is to be avoided. Is one of the core things that the Buddha said. Just tell the truth. Don't create the negative karma of dishonesty, of cheating. If but also nothing wrong with poly or open, or it's okay to have multiple partners if that's the agreement with your partner. But if that's not the agreement, you don't want the karma, no matter how exciting that is, how pleasurable that is. And maybe the most controversial, especially for Western Buddhists, but maybe everywhere, the fifth precept around avoiding the pleasure of intoxicants, of all recreational, mind, mood altering. And the key here is recreational, not putting anything into our bodies just for fun. No, it's not against medicine. It's not against, necessary painkillers because you had a surgery, or, like there's medicinal use, but it's an encouragement, a prohibition about all seeking sense pleasures through intoxicants, including not just for us recovering alcoholics, which, in this community, that fifth precept, because probably more than half of us in this room are recovering addicts. And so that fifth precept supports our recovery, supports our abstinence, and our healing from the suffering that addiction created in our lives. But this is a real dilemma for non-alcoholics who enjoy a glass of wine. It's culturally normal to have a drink here and there, or even regularly. And the Buddha says, if you want to walk this path of mindfulness, of present time, non-judgmental awareness, then not a good idea to ever put into your system the kind of things that blur your awareness. That take right? That's why alcohol and drugs are so fun, because they create an altered state. They, take the edge off of reality, create a false sense of, or I don't even know it's false, but they create a sense of elation or intoxication or being high. We call it being high, being loaded, being buzzed. It alters our relationship to reality in a way that is quite pleasant. And so that's a big renunciation that the Buddha is encouraging. And Ward and I were talking last night at dinner about how, this is the original teaching of the Buddha, the Theravadan tradition, the path of the elders, the Pali canon, the suttas. This is the old school Buddhism. But in some of the newer schools of Buddhism, like in Zen or in Tibetan Buddhism, these later developments, they change the precept to say it's okay to drink. It's okay to drink in moderation. You can use drugs in moderation, especially the American hippie Buddhists who started this shit in the West. So guilty of being like, we're going to keep smoking weed. We're going to keep taking psychedelics. we're going to meditate a lot, but also, LSD is killer. We love it. Little ketamine trip. Word was telling me about somebody who's leading a ketamine Buddhist meditation retreat. You can go on retreat and go into a K-hole on retreat. Guided meditation, ketamine, LSD, like all of this is happening in Buddhism. It's against early Buddhism, and Buddhism has, and changed over the years, but I'm coming from that kind of Theravada and the Buddhist teachings, as far as I understand them, in deep encouragement. Be free from intoxicants, be free from mood altering substances and using them in recreational ways. Because what we're trying to do is figure out how to deal with reality. Life on life's terms, as they say, reality as it is, without too many blurred lenses, without too many altered perspectives. We want to see clearly. I think the whole definition of Buddha, of awakening, is seeing clearly, seeing reality, seeing nature as it is, free from our delusions, free from any kind of obscuration. We can do that more and more with mindfulness. We can do that, but we can't do that when we're high. We can't do that when we're enjoying the sense pleasures that intoxicants create. And so, that's one of the teachings, one of the encouragements, one of the, the 5 renunciations of the householder Buddhist path is to not kill, not lie, not steal, not cheat, not be sexual misconduct, and not use drugs and alcohol. Pretty low level renunciation. It's not asking for celibacy. It's not asking for, to avoid. And then the intoxicants is an interesting one, because sugar, caffeine, and nicotine are allowable drugs. And they're fucking drugs. Let's not get it twisted. Sugar is a white powder. It is a drug. Many of us have become quite strung out on it. Sugar is a drug. Caffeine certainly is a stimulant. It's a nicotine. So, it's a minor stimulant, but so addictive. So for whatever reasons, there's a loophole in the intoxicants around these, that they're considered that they're not altering or kind of intoxicants on that level. But of course, it's all relative, because if you do enough caffeine, you will lose mindfulness. In moderation, caffeine, this is sort of the argument that Zen or the Tibetans or the people up at Spirit Rock have about alcohol. They're like, in moderation, you can still be mindful. Likewise with caffeine, in moderation. But if you drink 10 coffees, you're not going to be mindful anymore. You're going to be spun. Or the fucking energy drinks, too many, more than one, even one for some people, depending on your system, all of a sudden you're fucking high. It's altered your chemistry. So when it comes to this conversation about pleasure, I think first of all, it's identifying healthy sources of pleasure that aren't killing, lying, stealing, fucking the wrong person, getting loaded. Set those aside. And then we look at, what is it that we enjoy indulging in? What's our relationship like with food? What's our relationship like with appropriate sexual activity? What's our relationship like with, what are the activities that bring pleasure? Material stuff. Like I said, there's a place where the Buddha says, your stuff will give you a little temporary source of happiness. But breaking the delusion that my stuff is going to actually really make me happy long-term, that there's a material source of contentment, of well-being. Here's an interesting one, though, when it comes to materialism. The next thing on that list is the happiness of debtlessness, of not owing. And so when it comes to material things and how often we're going in debt of like, well, I want that new car or house or whatever. And so I'm going to take this huge mortgage, or I'm going to take these car payments. I'm going to pay all of this interest for this material thing that I think on some level is going to make me happy. But then I'm putting myself in debt, and then weighing the pleasure of the home or the vehicle, and then the stress of being in debt. And I don't know if you've been there yet. America is such a debting culture. Student loans, mortgages, credit cards. I don't know if you've been there yet, but and it's on the list. The Buddha says that experience of joy when you don't owe anybody anything, free debtlessness. Now, I believe he's mostly talking about material, the happiness of being free from debt, materially. I always think of when I say this and when I think of it, also the freedom from owing amends. Not owing apology or amends or even debts of gratitude. There's this practice that I've led a bunch of times that my father created a long time ago called a year to live. And part of this living this a year as though it's your last year to live. And a central part of that is, could you in this year clear the slate so that you could die in 12 months from now without owing anybody a debt of gratitude, where you've expressed it. Thank you. I appreciate you. And also, please forgive me for making all of the amends and being free from debt. In recovery, we do a lot of cleaning up the wreckage of our past, making amends where we've caused harm. But this other perspective of also there's the debts of gratitude that also need to be expressed, the unspoken thank yous and appreciations that we would also on our deathbed regret. I don't feel like I was really as appreciative. I don't feel like I let people know how much I appreciated them, how supported I felt, how loved I felt. I took it for granted. I didn't express it. So identifying the sources of pleasure that are appropriate, and acknowledging the internal tendency that all of us unenlightened beings have of clinging, of craving, the second noble truth. We talked about this last week. I'm talking about this all of the time. The second noble truth, almost all of our human suffering comes from clinging and craving, getting attached to pleasant experiences. And so this practice of like, how do I now, and it's where the question came from, I believe last week, how do I see that? I see the suffering of clinging to pleasure, craving for pleasure. Now I'm on this path, I'm practicing mindfulness, trying to practice non-attachment. How much do I need to avoid pleasure in order to not cling to it? And where is this healthy middle path balance of being able to enjoy pleasant, appropriate, pleasant experiences that aren't killing and lying and stealing and misconduct and intoxicants, that aren't on that list, but that are appropriate without clinging. Because we are in these minds and these bodies that crave and cling all by themselves. And this is I don't know, I think it's the fact, I believe it's the reality. And on some level, I think it's the good news, which part of what this teaching is saying is that your clinging is not your fault. Your tendency towards craving is not your fault. It's not personal. It's not something that you're doing. You're not choosing to be attached and addicted and craving. And it's just the way that we're built. It's just the human condition. It's not personal. It's not. So I feel like that is such a central, relieving, normalizing part of Buddhism. I really appreciate that the Buddha normalized the human condition to be like, you're suffering and you're craving for pleasure and you're not your fault. It's just the way it is. But this Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, the mindfulness teachings are an intervention, are a way to say, okay, mindfulness reveals impermanence. The more we take impermanence from an idea into a insight, meditation reveals everything's constantly changing. Pleasure is transient. It's arising and it's passing. Craving is repetitive, but no matter how pleasant it is, whatever it is, that meal, that sexual experience, that whatever experience it is, it's going to not last. It's going to be impermanent, beginning, middle, end, arise, pass. The insight into impermanence does naturally lead to less clinging. We see it's impossible to keep our pleasant experiences. They're passing through awareness. They're passing through consciousness. The body experiences it and it's gone. The mind experiences it and it's gone. And then, we want it again and again and again. I said at the end of the meditation, and this is the core skill we're trying to develop, non-attached appreciation. The more we understand that it's in the pleasure, whatever the pleasure is impermanent, the more we can say, okay, I want to appreciate it. I want to enjoy it. I want to feel it. I want to savor it. I want to savor sounds like there's a little clinging, but without clinging, how do I have a relationship to pleasure that I know this is impermanent and I'm going to indulge in it, I'm going to enjoy it, but I'm not going to suffer about it ending or not being there all of the time and not being the source of happiness, that it's something that pleasure comes and goes. And that it's impossible to have those levels of sense pleasure all of the time. Most of us people got strung out trying to feel good all of the time, became alcoholics, became drug addicts, became food addicts, trying to always have that sweet all of the time. It's just a dead end. As the Buddha, this path, it's a dead end looking for our happiness in sense pleasures. So then I feel like part of a lot of what Buddhism talks about is the joy that is available. And a lot of that is the joy of not suffering. Rather than the highs of the intoxicants or the pleasure. And it's so subtle, but it's so real, the pleasure of being comfortable in your own skin. Especially when you've lived most of your life so far uncomfortable in your own body. The more we meditate, the more we understand impermanence, the more compassion, the more loving kindness, the more we forgive ourselves and forgive others, that experience that eventually happens of being like, oh, I'm actually okay just as I am. It feels so good to not have resentments. What a joy to not hate. What a joy to be able to be at ease in my own body. The last thing on that list, the 4 types of happiness, material, sensual, debtlessness. The highest form on that specific teaching, the Buddha says, is the happiness of blamelessness. When you're living your life with integrity, you don't owe amends to people because you've made amends, you've taken responsibility for where you've been unskillful in your life, you've expressed the appreciation to the people who have been kind, generous, loving to you. You're not breaking the precepts, you're living with integrity. And blamelessness has to be, the caveat has to be blameless in the eyes of the wise. In the loving kindness sutta, the Buddha, one of the early lines is doing nothing that the wise would disapprove of. And so it's really important to when we're going to use this discernment, judgment of what's blame and the wise, because no matter what, you'll be subject to blame and criticism, and not everyone's going to approve of you, but hopefully living in a way that the wise would say, oh yeah, that's person is behaving in a skillful way for the most part, blameless in the eyes of the wise, not in the eyes of the ignorant, because you're always going to be judged. And the Buddha's a great example of people hated the Buddha. He was despised, and you think, wait, you had this enlightened being. But he was hated partially because of his identity politics, because he was against racism in a racist society. He said this caste system, this race system that we have going here is totally ignorant. But the society that believed in the racist caste system despised him. They said, this guy's fucking crazy. He's trying to disrupt our power, our control. Likewise with gender and sexism. He was hated because he was creating an order of nuns and empowering women in a way that they hadn't been empowered in that society, and supporting and saying, like, of course, we're not these bodies. We don't need to treat each other like our genders. Everyone has Buddha nature. Everyone has the ability to awaken no matter what. And he was hated. He was blamed. He was accused. He was public enemy to a lot of people because he was, and also he was non-theistic in a very theistic culture where people were saying, like, only God can return you to sanity. And he was like, not so. Actually, you have Buddha nature. Through your own mindfulness, you can wake up. Through your own renunciation, through your own wise actions, you can free yourself from suffering. Totally non-humanist psychology really is what Buddhism is. So blameless in the eyes of the wise, but of course, the theists and the sexists and the racists are going to be like, you're terrible. You're a terrible person that doesn't believe in God and racism. But the wise will be like, oh, it's so good that you actually understand wisdom and that you're living your life in those ways. I feel like maybe this isn't true for everyone, but for myself, and I know many of us, coming from addiction, coming from a perspective of recovery, and having spent, some portion of our lives chasing and indulging in sense pleasures and intoxicants, and then kind of coming to like, okay, now I'm going to learn to meditate, and I'm going to learn to deal with my pain, and I'm going to learn to enjoy pleasure that is appropriate, that's not intoxicants, that's not lying, killing, stealing, cheating. And it's really a lot less pleasant than drugs. And it takes for me, it took many years to actually learn to appreciate being comfortable in my heart and mind and comfortable in my body, and to actually enjoy serenity, the pleasure of peace, the pleasure of equanimity, the pleasure of not suffering all of the time, most of the time not suffering, is because it's not actually pleasant. It's just not painful. You know what I mean? I felt a little disappointed when I started to experience peace because I thought it was going to be more fun. My idea of peace was actually through the lens of craving for pleasure, and I thought it was going to be blissful. I thought, like, oh, this is going to be, if I can not suffer so much and I can experience some peace, that's going to feel great. It's going to be like crack. But it wasn't like crack. It was a little bit boring because of my tendency towards wanting excitement and dopamine, and peace was actually great, and I can call it pleasant in comparison to pain and suffering, but it doesn't necessarily have those highs of what we're used to, what we've conditioned our mind to, orgasmic, intoxicant. I might have said this last week, but I'll a couple more things, and then any questions or comments. One of my favorite teachings, I say it a lot, is a teaching called the simile of the cloth, where the Buddha says, this path is like inner purification and inner bathing, that we humans are like a cloth, and our true nature is unstained, is unobscured. But that we're stained with greed and hatred and delusion, and the survival. He doesn't say this, but I think it's just biological evolution of survival instinct, fight or flight, and the reptilian amygdala, and we have these brains that have awareness, but we're still driven by fear of pain and craving for pleasure, self-centeredness. And he says that, it gets in the way. But this intervention of mindfulness, of seeing the impermanent, the impersonal, the unreliable nature of all things, your own inner wisdom will reveal, will liberate you, will set you free, will cleanse, will purify, will scrub away all of the shit that's blocking your, and he says, and when you scrub it away, what remains in the kind of fabric of your being is love, loving kindness, metta, compassion, appreciation, which, one of the other, and I forgot to say this, one of the other pieces of Buddhist encouragement towards pleasure, healthy pleasure, is breaking our self-centeredness, and not only our pleasure, but learning to start empathizing and appreciating other people's happiness, rather than that self-centered human tendency where it's a I, me, mine. What am I experiencing? What am I getting? Of actually getting some freedom from that and turning towards like, good for you. What are you experiencing? I'm happy for you. Celebrating, appreciating, empathizing with other people's happiness. So he says that's part of what remains, is this heart that isn't so self-centered and appreciates that other people are happy, even when you're not. Good for you. I'm happy for you. I take pleasure in your happiness. Equanimity. So loving kindness, compassion, appreciation, equanimity. And then the factors of awakening, he says what remains is there's a sense of joy, of rapture, of tranquility, of concentration and mindfulness, and contentment, wisdom. So he goes through, when we free ourselves from what's blocking our freedom, we experience love, we experience compassion. And then there's almost a tantric kind of thing that he says there, where he says, this is in a dialogue with somebody, he's in a conversation. He says, and we come to the place through this middle path, where now we can enjoy sense pleasures without clinging. And he says, I've come to the place where I can eat the most delicious curries and chutneys, long grain basmati rice, and I can just enjoy the meal without clinging to it. And he says this like that it's the same as having compassion for all living beings, right? Like we think compassion for all living beings is this like really high, how can you do that? And he's saying, yes, we can have compassion for all living beings, and on the same sort of level of attainment is enjoying pleasure without clinging, non-attached appreciation to a delicious meal or experience. Because it's really hard to have compassion for all living beings. it's really hard to enjoy sense pleasures without clinging to them. We take it for granted because we're like, Indian food, just some takeout. But he's saying, this middle path, he spent all of those years in the extreme renunciation of fasting for long periods of times, of not only practicing celibacy, but like probably genital torture, like the sadhus do, kind of thinking like the craving is the problem. So let's do extreme self-denial. So he's like, now I indulge in delicious food and I don't cling to it. I don't suffer about it. End with this and then see if you have any questions. It says, the Dharma of the Buddha does not require a person to go into homelessness or to resign from the world unless they feel called upon to do so. But the Dharma of the Buddha requires every person to free themselves from the illusion of a permanent self and to cleanse one's heart. The cleansing one's heart is that sutta I was just talking about, freeing ourselves from greed and hatred and delusion. And to give up one's thirst, one's craving, one's attachment to pleasure. And to lead a life of righteousness, the blameless life of ethics and integrity. And whatever people do, whether they remain in the world as artisans, merchants, or officers of the king, or they retire from the world and devote themselves to a life of religious meditation, let them put their whole heart into their task. Let them be diligent and energetic. And if, like the lotus flower which grows out of muddy water but remains untouched by the mud, they engage in life without that image, kind of a more common, that the lotus flower. I feel like that's our Sangha. Maybe it's humanity. But this sort of like, can I be in this material world, in this sensual experience, the mud of Venice, Los Angeles, or wherever you are, the mud, without being so touched by it, having enough wisdom to see this is not who we are or what we are. The lotus which grows out of the muddy water but remains untouched by the mud, they engage in life without cherishing envy or hatred. And they live in the world not a life of self, but a life of truth. Then surely joy, peace, and bliss will dwell in their minds. The kind of spiritual pleasure, spiritual happiness, rather than sensual or material. Any questions or comments, or please, Adam, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam.
I just wanted to firstly say thank you for your time,
Yeah,
your wisdom, and this space that you've created for all of us. It's been like very transformative in a short amount of time for me. Just a quick comment, something that really, like everything you said resonated very much with me. But something that I have come to realize through meditation and in my like professional addiction, right, is that like really I think the creation of addiction is because we can't cope with life on life's terms, and meditating is the best analogy that I can think of for being able to do so, because within yourself is a reflection of your life. It's your emotions and your struggles, and you have to learn how to sit and deal with that. And then like for me, meditating helped me to realize that my addiction just created it like doubled up on the suffering, because it was like, okay, like I prefer to choose the suffering of like getting out by going through, right, dealing with my life as it is, than dealing with the suffering of like having like caught my next fix, or like worrying about money because I just spent $100 on, you know what I mean? And it's like eliminating that factor, the drugs and everything, it's just so freeing, because as challenging as it is to sit with yourself and deal with your life and your issues on its own terms, it's so rewarding and so freeing and liberating, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's something that really resonated, and just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I like your reflections and the insights. Somebody at home is asking me to repeat what you just said, which I don't, because they can't hear you guys so well. It was more of a sharing of I mean, one of the pieces that stood out to me was that addiction was like not being able to cope with life on life's terms, and that meditation was one of the core skills that Adam was reflecting as teaching them how to deal with the mind and life on kind of to see clearly and to respond to the pleasant and the unpleasant, and then they had some reflection on kind of that willingness to do this hard work of recovery and of meditation. Even though it's not pleasant all of the time, it gets us free, and it's worth doing that, and breaking that tendency to go for the quick fix rather than what meditation, which is not the quick fix, but is the gradual process of awakening. Yeah. Eric, I think last one, we're almost out of time.
I have a question about, I'll frame it like this: how much meditation is too much meditation? So if I'm meditating and it brings so much joy to my life that I can't go without it, you know what I mean? So I need to sit every single day for 12 hours, and now I'm super attached to this thing, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not doing it, then I'm suffering over it, right? But it's also bringing me closer to enlightenment, right? And it's helping me to understand my mind. So I'm kind of, what does the Buddha have to say about that?
I mean, for sure. Eric's question or comment and question was about like what happens when we get too attached to our practice and like almost dependent on meditation as our source of happiness, and that without meditation we can't really cope. We can't really my sense is that it's a developmental process, and that there is so much emphasis that we're meditating in order to be able to engage in the world in a wise way, not using meditation as an escapist, temporary, pleasant avoidance technique, but using meditation in order to develop more compassion for pain, and then being able to go out in the world and deal with the difficult experiences and pain, and having more compassion in the world. Likewise with pleasure, more, the meditation as the formal training in non-attachment, and then bringing that non-attachment into our relationships, into our work, into our, right? So it's the training ground for life. But it's natural to get a little bit of attachment to like, hey, this is giving me some relief. I want to do it a lot. I want to go on a lot of retreats, and I want to meditate a lot because it's a place where I'm finding some refuge. So it's natural. And then I think over the years and maybe decades of your practice, you'll see, oh, I don't have to do 12 hours a day anymore because that wisdom is sort of in my bones now. I've developed that non-attachment and that compassion and that appreciation and that comfort in my own skin. And, a 40-minute sit is plenty to kind of remind myself of that, and to continue this process of mind and heart training, and that it's maintenance rather than dependence. Yeah. So we'll leave it there for tonight. Class is done by donation. Against the Stream is a nonprofit that is only supported by your generosity. We don't have any benefactors who are paying the bills around here. You're the benefactors. So please be as generous as you can be in your donations. Sebastian's not here tonight. I'm on my own. So you can put cash in the bowl if you're donating cash, or there's a QR code there for the Venmo if you want to do it that way. If you need to donate with a card, you could ask me and I could tell you. I probably don't know how to figure that out, but I could try. And please consider becoming a monthly supporter. One of the best ways to support Against the Stream and what we do here is by saying whether I show up or not, and kind of breaking from this fee for service kind of materialist and capitalist, like you don't have to pay to be here. Everyone's welcome to be here. And rather than only donating when you are here, as though you're giving because you're getting, of just supporting the Dharma and just supporting the activities of the Dharma Center by becoming a monthly supporter. There's no membership here. Everyone's welcome, but become a supporter if you want to support this thing so we can continue doing it and paying the rent and existing. So please be generous. And I think I don't know if anybody posted the, I don't know if they posted the link for you guys at home, but if you go to the Against the Stream website, you can.
In there.
Is it in there?
You betcha.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, the link is in there. I see it up top. 10-day retreat, September, I think it's 23rd through October, last week in September, first couple of days in October. Here in Los Angeles, there's a couple of spots left. If you want to come and deepen your practice, 10-day silent retreat, consider coming. That's on the Against the Stream website. It was nice to have such a full room tonight. It hasn't been so full lately. There's these cards on the desk that are like postcards, but they have the information about the class. If you want to, if you have friends that you want to invite, take some of these cards and then, drop them at the coffee shop or invite a homie and give them the card with the cool painting on it and stuff. So those are on the desk for your taking. Gathering the merit, the goodness, the positive intentions that we share. May each one of us have a radical transformation in our relationship to pleasure. May we become less attached, more appreciative. May we share this merit with each other, and then as a group, sharing this merit outward in all directions with all living beings. And together, may we create a positive change on this planet.